and entrepreneur straight out of New York City, Michael Chernow. What's cracking?
First of all, you got to be able to manage your appetite, because if you are unable to do that, you're probably going to deviate from your set course of action or whatever your plan is.
So when you say that, what do you mean? Let's unpack
So
it.
to manage appetite, that's usually related to protein intake, meal timing, and attentive eating. A lot of people are like, they're eating snack foods in the school pickup line to get their kids. It's not like I'm sitting down and enjoying this meal. So it's both the context of the meal and the ingredients in the meal. So I think there's something to be said, even decades ago, we probably used to have more meals where we'd sit around as a family, eat, and you'd have your food, you'd chew, you're not watching Netflix, you're not on your smartphone, you'd be eating the meal.
What up, y'all? Welcome back to the Creatures of Habit podcast. Today, I've got a guest on the show who I'm very excited to talk about. I got a lot of questions. He's a real expert. He's an expert in the world of nutrition, in the world of fitness, in the world of health coaching. His name is Sam Miller, and he is a best-selling author. He wrote a book called Metabolism Made Simple, which I'm excited to talk about because I really want to understand a little bit more about metabolism today. I think that we all think about wellness in regards to how we move our body and what we put into our body, but we don't actually boil it down to metabolism and how we digest food. It's a big deal. It is actually the third piece of the puzzle that I think we don't speak enough about. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. Sam is also a podcast host. He is a health coach for health coaches. He has programming for health coaches, fitness coaches that are looking to continue growing their knowledge in the world of wellness coaching. And he can tell us a little bit about that as well. But I'm really excited to have you on the show, man.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Welcome.
I'm excited to be here.
So tell us a little bit about yourself. Give us just a quick little snapshot.
Yeah, so Cliff Notes, I've been in the industry for almost 17 years now. Started off a little more on the personal training side and just really navigating my own health and fitness journey. Because when I started out, and we're kind of close in age, I feel like a lot of the information that was out there was either misinformation or was misapplied to me. So it was not specific to my particular goals. And that kind of led me astray, especially given I had a pretty bad concussion in my teens. And so I was focused on internal health at probably an earlier age than most. Because usually it's like, you get in your 50s and 60s, or maybe you have a parent or a relative or loved one and they have an unexpected health issue or maybe some longevity concerns. And then you start to look on the inside. But for me, it started a lot earlier. And then also seeing that with my clients in the gym, there was more to the story than just counting the sets and reps of what was going on a daily basis. So that's when I started to explore nutrition and the concept of really what now I refer to more as lifestyle medicine. Like, what are we doing the other 23 hours of the day that contribute to our health and fitness journey besides just, I went in, I did my workout, and I leave. So that sent me down this rabbit hole of learning more about kind of metabolism, like you talked about earlier, the endocrine system, gut health, and so much more. And a lot of the things that weren't really explained or popular at the time in the 90s and 2000s, we were probably coming up a little bit more in the industry. So that's my background. So I started off primarily coaching individuals in their transformation, and then later shifted. My roster became mostly nutrition coaches or fitness coaches. And I realized, that's interesting that I'm, most of this advice that I'm providing is going to them, and realized that a lot of times they'd be sort of picking my brain on these client cases that they had. And I was like, well, why don't I just kind of open this up and troubleshoot and see if I can help people? So that's what led to the work that I do today. And then over the past few years, my main focus has been the book, Metabolism Made Simple, and then my podcast, which is Sam Miller Science.
I love that. I love the fact that just sort of organically, your career path went from helping people with their transformations, and then you found that you were just really coaching the coaches.
Yeah. It was like 60, 70%. And so it made me look a little bit deeper and think, why is this happening? And I think it was my roster as a whole was like a microcosm of what was going on in the industry. We started to see more complex health issues, other concerns, people who maybe were not dieting properly, or they were constantly chronically dieting, which we see a lot in the industry. And, the traditional personal training textbook or where people were getting nutrition education didn't really cover those issues or mesh a lot of what you were talking about earlier in terms of, we think of it as movement, right? We think about the training side, or maybe we think a little bit about, okay, this is what's going into my body, but not always tying it all together and matching the two cohesively so that it really supports our goals.
You had talked about bodybuilding. And I also was bodybuilding for a while. And I was bodybuilding in a natural organization where, getting to stage ready was like really, really hard.
Really hard.
And, literally, I mean, it's kind of embarrassing to say at this point, but like for like 5 weeks leading up to my show date, I was eating like stacks of tilapia. That was it, and it was, I mean, mentally, physically, and everything was just like, I was like out to lunch,
Yeah.
I would get like 1 or 2 days of like a heavy carb, load. And it destroyed so many things, right? Like I almost think now having gone through that, would my body have done better non-naturally bodybuilding than naturally bodybuilding, because my hormones just got tanked because of my dieting.
Right.
And my digestive system, man, like, I mean, to this day, right now I cannot eat sweet potatoes, which I'm so sad about.
Yeah, I love sweet potatoes.
Absolutely love sweet potatoes. My system can't handle it. I get bloated immediately. I'm gassy. It's not fun to be around, right? I can't eat onions or garlic. Can't do it. I used to be able to do this before my bodybuilding days. Like I had a stomach of steel. And so I want to dig into the metabolism and to the digestion topics, because I think not enough of us really know.
Yeah. So what you mentioned, essentially when we go through something like a contest prep, and this could be getting photo shoot lean, right? It doesn't need to be bodybuilding. So think any type of intense diet just for dropping body fat. And so when we do that, there's sort of this concept that's been researched called metabolic adaptation, or what some people refer to when they think like, oh, I messed up my metabolism or my metabolism's slow. Really, it's a transient change that happens when we diet both metabolically and hormonally. And so we see down regulations in certain hormones, like you mentioned, but also the stress of that dieting and doing intense training can lead to changes in terms of our gut microbiome. And that's likely what you were experiencing there, as well as high stress. Usually when we're prepping, we're consuming a fair amount of caffeine. So with that, the stress plus caffeine, lower stomach acid levels can make for pretty much what I call like the perfect storm recipe for disaster with contest prep. And you mentioned natural versus enhanced bodybuilding. And so when you go through a prep or any type of diet naturally, you do see that downregulation, especially in men, of testosterone. Women will see changes in their menstrual cycle, downregulated thyroid and things like that. But when you are usually, in a non-natural federation, they're doing things behind the scenes to counteract those changes that would happen if you were, dieting naturally. And so they're able to support, a higher either super physiological hormone level, which means higher than like the baseline ranges that they give you in your labs, or they will essentially backfill certain things that would normally fall during that prep to keep them a bit higher. Now, most people will take it a little bit further to the extreme if they're really trying to be, if this is like NPC, IFBB level. However, you could argue that, natural bodybuilding in many ways, even though you're not using any sort of exogenous or external compounds, meaning things like anabolics that are coming into your system, the dieting and stress and training itself is not very healthy. So bodybuilding, even natural bodybuilding, when taken to an extreme, is not necessarily healthy or optimal for your body. I think in a season of your life, you can learn a lot from it, and it can serve as like part of your health journey, but it's certainly not where you're going to have optimal lab values. It's not where you're going to have optimal productivity. Your business is probably going to take a hit. Family life, personal life, relationships. And like you said, that clarity and cognition wasn't there. You're out to lunch. Those are all very normal things that happen anytime we deprive the body of both macro and micronutrients. So we're just running at an overall energy deficit in terms of intake. And then typically, like when you're only eating tilapia, we're not getting that array of micronutrients. So normally, now if you get a variety of foods in there, at least across your meals, you're at least hitting different buckets of micros, vitamins and minerals and things like that, essential fatty acids. Tilapia is pretty much, just protein and maybe a little trace amount of fat in there, and not a ton of variety or other things coming in. So it's easy to see how that could have led to maybe some gut and hormone issues, and why now, you're probably feeling a lot better in terms of the approach, but still at a pretty low body fat overall compared to maybe what you were doing during your contest prep days. And I can relate to that because that was kind of the first itch or sport that I had in the fitness realm, was just doing some type of bodybuilding or physique competition. I also did my first show was a natural contest prep, got like an upper respiratory infection 6 weeks out, just like not good at all. So it's not uncommon to get sick during those preps or to have some serious metabolic and hormonal changes as a result of the modifications in food, and then also the intense exercise.
Yeah, everything you said, right? Everything you said. The thing that I loved about, the thing that I loved and actually kind of secretly still love about that kind of challenge is the discipline component.
Yes.
That for me there's something that I think a small handful of humans appreciate,
right,
in this idea to be able to make a decision and just
do it.
Yep. Right? And that can then be applied to sort of anything else in life. I really do have this firm belief that when I found fitness, that was the poured foundation for everything else I built my life upon. Mm-hmm. In business, in family, I really do believe that. And so the other thing that I think going through that 5-6 year period of time for me, from like 2017 through 2020, whatever it was, end of 22, I just got an unbelievable crash course in nutrition and seeing how effective measuring nutrition can have on you, right?
Yeah.
Because there's 6-7 months of the year you're eating in a surplus, and certain things made me feel certain ways when I'm eating in a surplus, and 5 months out of the year I'm in a calorie deficit. And watching like where I was cutting and where I was making decisions make massive impacts pretty quickly. Right? Like it was just it's a science. And I believe that like anybody who would really want to get a crash course on nutrition, challenge yourself to do something like that, I
definitely think there are skills that you can develop during an intense prep like that, or really just devoting yourself to a process. It could be bodybuilding, it could be powerlifting, CrossFit, strongman. I think it's the act of the pursuit itself towards that goal, and then just giving your all towards that, and then realizing the attributes, characteristics that you develop along the way. And, afterwards you kind of have this new identity as you come out of it. You're a person who does all of those things, which is super powerful. So for me, I experienced a lot of the same things, going through that type of commitment in a fitness journey really pays dividends in so many other areas. So I noticed that using the book as an example, it's the ultimate delayed gratification. Each day you sit down at a Google Doc or Microsoft Word, whatever, you type your notes, you're chipping away at it a paragraph at a time. It's kind of like when you go do the sets and reps in the gym, or you track the food, you eat the right meal that you need to support your goals, but there's no instant gratification. Like you're not on stage yet, right? So imagine when you're 6 months out from a show, you don't have the trophy yet, right? But you still got to do the work. And so the same thing applies with business, just that concept of the daily deposits that you have to make in order to have that long-term ROI. And that sort of longer time horizon, rather than just viewing things of, trying to seek like I'm getting the result or the gratification today and being able to see that over a long time. I think bodybuilding really does teach that. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that everybody does it in a healthy way or they come out the other side better for it. I think there are some people who maybe didn't have as positive experiences maybe you and I did, but it certainly taught me a lot, even though it wasn't perfect for my health. I think mentally I was able to extract some positive things that I could apply in other arenas of life, like you said, with family, with business, and other arenas. So I think it's really the process of, identifying, okay, I want to be on stage or I want to do this competition. And then you're reverse engineering, how do I get to that outcome? And then you can apply that to so many different things.
Now that you are not bodybuilding, I would imagine like in a competitive capacity.
No, I've been out of it way, like even longer than you have. So I think the last show I did was like 2017.
What does your fitness look like now?
So resistance training, and I think walking is immensely underrated. I've incorporated a little bit more conditioning and cardio lately just because I recently switched to a little bit more garage gym training than I used to do. It's very easy when you have a garage if you don't have a ton of cardio equipment to get away from that. So a little more echo bike in my life right now, but resistance training has always been the cornerstone. And then I think getting in other doses of movement, whether that be, just getting outside. I've got dogs, so I love to go out in nature, go for a walk, play with them, just hang out. I do a lot of, last year I did a ton of weight vest walks over the summer. So part of my routine last summer is I throw on a weight vest and go for a walk. I still do a little bit of that right now, but I did kind of switch a little bit because I had some stuff going on with my shoulder where I was like trying to modify what I was doing and get myself a different type of conditioning and cardiovascular stimulus. And that's where the echo came out. Yeah, I was like, I have not been doing it's something that I truthfully kind of sucked at. And I was like, I need to start doing more of this. And so what's convenient about the echo bike is it actually dries you off real nicely after you do cold therapy. So if you go in and you do like a plunge, pop out, you can use exercise to recover from the cold. And then while you're doing it, because of the fan, you actually get pretty dry.
Ass off though, man.
Yeah, well, you're also in New York, so I'm in North Carolina. It's not quite as cold there, but doing that, I'll pop into the garage a little bit, and that helps me. So I've kind of stacked it with some other things that's been helpful. But usually, I'd say looking at this over a macro period, right, versus the micro of where we're at in the day to day. What's remained consistent over time is consistent resistance training.
How many days a week resistance?
Usually, for many seasons of my life, it was 5, but now it's like a minimum of 4. And then depending on, I may do some accessory work or something on the additional days, always a base of at least 4. I'd say on average of 5 over the last decade, but there were seasons where I was training 6 days a week, right?
Sure.
Depending on what the goal was.
For your resistance stuff, do you typically stick to like a push-pull leg, or are you like, do you mix it up? Do you do full body splits? Like how do you?
I've done a little bit of everything over the years. I would say push-pull legs for sure. I've experimented with some higher frequency training here and there. When I was getting started in the industry, upper lower is a great foundation for a lot of people. I've tried some full body, doing full body more as an anterior posterior instead of like true full body. So it still buys you some recovery time if you plan intelligently. So it's kind of like you do full body, but maybe you're hitting like push versus doing something like where your back hamstrings, stuff like that.
That's actually really cool. I've never heard of an anterior posterior full body split.
Yeah, it's I wouldn't say it's my favorite, but when you are traveling and things and you need to hit, you're unsure what you're going to hit when you're going to hit it, you're making the best of the situation, that can be a good one depending on your gym frequency. It's easy to overdo it though, and that's where I think a lot of people do well. They like kind of the push-pull legs for bodybuilding, but really it depends on what your goal is. For me, depending on the season of my life and what goal I had, the training is modified to match that. So if we were to break down 15 years, it's like there were probably 5 years very much bodybuilding oriented split. There were times where it was more strength oriented. I had friends who were like strongmen or powerlifters, and I'm in the gym with them and doing stuff. So there's not one set way I've approached things, but the consistent aspect of that is, there's a good amount of resistance training going on, hypertrophy style kind of rep ranges. And, I've always had at least 12 out of my 15 to 17 years in the industry, I've had a dog. So I'm always walking with him, doing stuff, getting outside, and then a mix of some other form of conditioning. I've gone through phases where I love the sled. I've gone through phases where I love like weight vest walks. I've gone through phases where maybe it's a machine and I have a goal, like buddies in the gym, we're competing towards a calorie metric on something, or we're, working on a time, for something, whether it's a prowl or push, sled drag. So that there's been some seasonality to it, but the two basics that never go away, resistance training and walking, you can stay super lean doing that, and good for overall health. And then I think you dose the other things depending on, am I going towards a performance goal? Is this an aesthetic goal? Am I doing this for overall health and longevity reasons? Or maybe like you right now, like your conditioning is probably more CrossFit oriented and work capacity and things like that, which I've had seasons like that too. So that third of the equation kind of moves a little bit.
I would like to say, and I could be, well, I'm not wrong. I mean, I'm 95%, if not more, 97% of those that engage in fitness at a clip, like at a regular pace, 5-6 days a week, are aesthetically focused, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. I think I am one of them. I mean, I also, when I got into CrossFit last year, it was really about it was performance for me. So I really, interestingly, like my body morphed into a CrossFit body like very quickly, because I completely changed up my thought process on my macros, and I just wasn't in the gym for, CrossFit training is so much different than bodybuilding. Right?
Yeah, it's immensely different.
So much different, and it's not. Like I just watched my body change, and I wasn't like fired up about the way my body changed. Like a CrossFit aesthetic is just different than.
Yeah, you can perform better in CrossFit with slightly more body fat, eating a higher macronutrient threshold, versus bodybuilding. You can probably do that hypertrophy training and accessory work on a lower intake.
The weird thing for me though was that I didn't change my caloric intake that much. I really didn't. Like I've always eaten the brunt of my carbohydrates pre and post workout. It's like kind of where I do it. I eat like 50% of my daily requirement pre or post workout. Or if I'm training fasted, which I don't really do much anymore, but I used to do, I would eat I would eat 100 grams of carbohydrates after working out. But it was just so interesting for me to like go from bodybuilding to CrossFit, and I absolutely love CrossFit. Like I really do. I don't know if it's, when I first got in, I was so gung-ho. I was like, that's it. This is what I'm doing for the next 3-4 years. And then my back went, my left shoulder's out. Like, I'm injured, and I know that it's probably because I'm not 23 and starting CrossFit. I'm 42 and starting CrossFit. Yeah. So it's a different, like my body is just it's not the same. That said, I have incorporated an unbelievable amount of mobility into my life that I'm so grateful for. If had I not gotten into CrossFit and had the injuries, chances are I would not be nearly as focused and committed to mobility, which I think is absolutely necessary for men and women as we get older, right? Yeah. I want to talk to you about nutrition though. I want to ask, before we get into habits, because I really would love to know what your morning and evening routine look like. In general, I know that there's not a one size fits all for nutrition. Meal plan that is going to just simply work with everyone. But if you can give the audience or the listeners like 3 to 5 things to think about for those who want to stay lean, have energy, be able to get great sleep, and be healthy, right? Like if you can give a few things just for people to sort of understand based on your experience in your study, what would you say?
So I do agree that nutrition needs to be individualized. I take kind of a demand-based approach to nutrition. So depending on your activity level, your health history, all of those things, we may switch that up. And I like to use frameworks for teaching, because then you can figure out what foods work best within the framework versus thinking, well, Sam and Michael eat that, so I need to eat that, right? And there are going to be general rules of thumb around things like protein intake that I think it's kind of been overdone in the industry. Like it's true, right? Like we can agree, hey, if you're interested in building muscle, a higher protein intake is good. 100% agree with that. But to help someone break free of like the diet dogma and think about what works for them, I use the 5 M's for managing metabolism. So I talk about, first of all, you got to be able to manage your appetite, because if you are unable to do that, you're probably going to deviate from your set course of action or whatever your plan is. So
when you say that, what do you mean? Let's unpack
So
it.
to manage appetite, that's usually related to protein intake, meal timing, and attentive eating. A lot of people are like, they're eating snack foods in the school pickup line to get their kids. It's not like I'm sitting down and enjoying this meal. So it's both the context of the meal and the ingredients in the meal. So I think there's something to be said, even decades ago, we probably used to have more meals where we'd sit around as a family, eat, and you'd have your food, you'd chew, you're not watching Netflix, you're not on your smartphone, you'd be eating the meal. So there's the context of the meal and the ingredients in the actual meal. Both of those will impact your appetite and overall satiety from that. So let's say I choose something that's a little bit higher in terms of food volume, like strawberries and watermelon are a great example of that. They have higher food volume. If you know that works for you, then use that as one of as far as your key to managing appetite. Maybe hey, protein and this fruit works really great for me, so that's going to be my snack, right? Cool. Let's apply that for you. Maybe for someone else, we were actually having a conversation about, oatmeal before the show. For some people, that's a great, maybe that's a great option for them. But usually we're managing appetite. It's usually those single ingredient whole foods. And we're looking primarily at protein, water intake, meal timing and then the attentiveness at that meal, chewing our food. Blood sugar regulation goes into that as well. And then kind of like my last thing would be fiber, but the individual threshold for fiber can vary. So like what's good for you in terms of fiber and your digestive tolerance may be different than me, and that's okay. But a little bit, including that and choosing foods that have that, probably beneficial. So that's managing your appetite. We always want to maximize adherence. So picking things that align with your personal preferences. So if you have certain protein foods, like let's say you never want to eat tilapia ever again because you did it during your bodybuilding prep, that's okay. So let's figure out how do we, match this with the other, M's that we're going to talk about. Let's say you want to have some lean steak, maybe you include some poultry here and there, or whole eggs, something like that. Cool. We're getting that protein in. That's going to help us manage our appetite, but it aligns with your personal preferences, which makes it more sustainable because we know that a huge part of a health and fitness journey is being consistent. If you're not consistent, it's not going to work. So that's the adherence portion of it. I like to emphasize gut health. So maximizing absorption and assimilation, just looking at digestive function as a whole. You mentioned, hey, I'm not doing super great with sweet potatoes right now. So that's where we have to think, okay, so for Michael, he's not eating that. I'm actually eating sweet potatoes almost every day, right? I don't mean to make you jealous or hurt your feelings.
How do I get back to that?
You're like, we'll talk about it. Picking foods that work for you. So if you're feeling distended, bloated, you're experiencing indigestion, you're uncomfortable, it's leading to unhealthy bowel movements or irregularity, that would be a sign to me that maybe we need to rotate, remove, or come back and reintroduce the food later. It doesn't mean you can never eat the food again. It just means, hey, for right now, we might need to go through a period where we kind of log your food, we see what's going on, and then we, maybe substitute a similar macro profile, and then we come back to it. So let's say you're not doing great with sweet potatoes, but you can have red potatoes or other root, maybe you have some type of squash or root vegetable. Cool. Like you're doing well with that. And then let's see why, let's unpack why that might be an issue, maybe sweet potatoes during bodybuilding prep or something like that. And then we come back to it. So that's the absorption portion. We talked about adherence and also appetite. Another one is mitigating adaptation. So that's that chronic dieting that we talked about. Far too many people lack periodization or seasonality with their nutrition. So I include this M because it emphasizes the importance of the maintenance phase, the diet phase. You talked about being in a surplus earlier. I think a lot of people in the health and fitness industry, they want to look a certain way. Like you mentioned, a ton of people have aesthetic goals when they come into the game. And because of that, it's always a race to the bottom with their calories. It's, how can I control this intake, portion control, et cetera. And I have no problem with someone wanting to go into some type of calorie deficit to lose body fat. The problem is when we try to do that in perpetuity. That's where we see those hormonal changes that you talked about with metabolic adaptation. And we can avoid that through seasonality in our approach, having some maintenance phases and what I call the seasons of nutrition. It's kind of like, when it's fall, that season of autumn, and you see pumpkin spice everywhere, right? That's a season, but we don't really want that year round. Like we still appreciate, Christmas and springtime and summertime. We want seasons with our nutrition too. So that's our fourth one. And the fifth one is just minding your micronutrient status, because that would be the example of someone who's kind of like macro hacking everything, or maybe they are getting super lean and you are only eating tilapia, but maybe we're leaving things on the table like our vitamins and minerals that we actually need to get in. And so that's where when people talk about proteins that are rich in those foods, fruits and vegetables that may contain those nutrients, and single ingredient whole foods have that whole food matrix where maybe I'm getting in some protein, or if it's a carb source, maybe I'm getting some fiber, I'm getting, the vitamins that come with that, the minerals as well. And that's where when people forget that, usually it's en route to a physique goal. This is where they all have to work together in unison, because some people will say, well, this tastes good to me and this is my personal preference and this helps me get leaner. And, they actually do have seasonality in their approach. They reverse diet or recovery diet. They go through diet phases, but they may be lacking from the actual nutrient portion of nutrition, right? The nourishment portion of the caloric intake. And sometimes we miss that. So that's my fifth one. And I'd say that's probably the most underrated one, because people don't realize that plays into gut health. That also plays into things like testosterone levels, thyroid function, and just overall, cognition and performance. And even, other aspects of health, iron status and so much more. So when we look at it across the board, those 5 things, if you start to kind of think through them, and I elaborate on this in Metabolism Made Simple and also in my free content, so you don't need to even grab the book to see it. But in my content, I talk about this a lot because you might find like, okay, cool. I enjoy having whole eggs and, fruit works really well for me for breakfast, or maybe you find that you prefer, maybe you make a shake or smoothie or something in the morning, right? And then we figure out, okay, from there, how is my appetite? How did I do in terms of digesting that meal? And then we can look at it at both the day-to-day level and then across like a week, as if you were going to check in with a coach, or across a month and then apply it. And that's where I wanted people to kind of break free of the diet dogma of like, oh, I got to be vegan, or oh, I need to do carnivore, versus being able to have a way to critically think about nutrition and then say, I'm going to adopt this approach because this works best for me based on what my goals are right now. And then in a different part of your life, that may change. So I like those tools because it enables people to kind of, it's like the nutrition industry at times is kind of like the Matrix or the Wizard of Oz, where there's like stuff going on behind the curtain and you see these people posting and arguing on Instagram, but the end consumer doesn't really get the inner workings of metabolism and physiology and how it all works, which makes it a really confusing place to be. And that's why so many people fall off the wagon. So that's why I kind of provide examples there, break it down, and then think, okay, if I can start checking these boxes, I'm going to be moving in the right direction.
What if somebody wants to just live for, like, what if a guy wants to live at 10% body fat, just live there, and a woman wants to live at, let's call it 17% body fat? Is that like a sustainable lifestyle? Is that something that you would say we could figure this out? Or is that something that is relatively unrealistic and, people just need to have a little bit more flexibility with seasonality?
I think you can have seasonality while still staying within a window of your body fat range that is your desired preference, but the exact percentage will depend on your health history. And so for women, menstrual cycle health and hormonal health and things like that. For men, testosterone levels, as well as performance in your day-to-day, quality of life, biofeedback, sleep. So if you start to get to that low body fat percentage and your sleep is trash and you have these issues, the seasonality may help to where we're going to work towards that, or maybe even in a maintenance phase, we have some recomposition that's happening. We're eking closer to that. And I think the longer you've been in the industry, the more you've allowed your training to compound over time. Like you've just repeatedly been in the gym, you've repeatedly made good decisions with your nutrition. It does become a little bit easier to maintain that desirable body fat level with a little bit less maybe deliberate seasonality. Like that could be eventually your maintenance, but I think it takes a bit to get there, and your ability to get there will be dependent on your health history. So if you were 32% body fat, the first time you get down there, like when you diet and you start to lose body fat and you get lean for the first time, that's very different than someone who's been, think about maybe you had a friend from high school who was like a gymnast or something, and then they've consistently been at that body fat level, but they've maintained it at a higher nutrient intake. So your past diet history, your movement history, your individual sort of health and hereditary factors all will play into your ability to do that. And you can do that. It just may take more time than people initially expect. Mm-hmm. But for someone like yourself who's been in the industry for a long time and you're consistent with your training, you're consistent with your nutrition, you prioritize your recovery, I think the more you can manage those other lifestyle factors and focus on food quality, nutrition, and get that training in, it makes it a lot more reasonable to do. I just think for a beginner, that wouldn't be where I would start, but they can get there.
I've got another question, and then let me ask this question, and then I'm going to get your morning routine because it's important. So one of the M's, I believe it was the third M, we brought up potentially stepping into a protocol where you're removing some foods and where there's some sort of break from things that you think potentially could be upsetting your stomach or not agreeing with you in some way, shape, or form. Is there a specific protocol that you like to run with, like the Whole30, or like are there any specific, what is it, FODMAP?
Low FODMAP. Yeah, I'll give you some parameters. When we're having a broader conversation on a platform like this, I'm hesitant to make one specific nutritional recommendation because the cluster of symptoms that someone is experiencing may have a different root cause. So I could talk to you right now and try to provide insights and help for you, but it might mislead Jim or Michael or Sally who's listening to the show. So we'll talk a little bit about it and some ways to approach it and some common irritants that I think would be helpful. But some of the biggest things are when people are experiencing digestive issues, it can tie back to other things besides food, stress, lack of training modulation, or, they've haven't taken a deload since the Bears won the Super Bowl. Like if you train really hard, taking a little bit of a break can be helpful. It's not to say don't go into the gym. It's just be mindful of your training intensity if you constantly have issues there. Sleep, caffeine intake. If you're constantly, in stress cadet mode, that's going to impact your gut health as well. So look at the whole lifestyle and look at the food. I like to start with just a simple food journal, and then I'll look for common irritants. Someone experiencing digestive issues who's pounding food from the state fair is going to be very different than someone who's oh, I've been shopping at Whole Foods and I'm cooking my meals at home and I'm still having digestive issues. So I like the food journal because it shows, I usually like to look at the intake and then what are the associated symptoms. This is why biofeedback is so important. And I talk about the concept of shreds. So every client that I coach, we go through sleep, hunger, recovery, energy, digestion, and stress. We're going to rate that on a quantitative scale. Or if you use something like an Oura Ring or some type of recovery device, we can use that to monitor your sleep and your recovery. HRV could fit in there as well. So for athletes, we can track that stuff. So for digestion, it is going to connect to these other quality of life factors and biofeedback categories. Now, can some people alleviate their symptoms with low FODMAP, which basically means eliminating fermentable ogleo, di, mono, and polysaccharides, which are types of carbohydrates that ferment in the gut and can lead to irritation for folks who are sensitive. Removing those foods can be helpful for some, but the problem is people mistake that as a long-term intervention when it's just a short-term acute approach. And that's why I'm always hesitant to say, okay, this is my favorite, go do this. Mm-hmm. Whole30, you're essentially just eliminating those multi-ingredient hypocaloric or hypercaloric processed foods and focusing more on single ingredient foods. But there are things in the Whole30 like nightshades, nuts and seeds that can be bothersome for some people. Not everybody can tolerate those as well. And also, even a very nutritious food like an egg or some people like egg whites, those can be bothersome. So usually I just start with the common irritants, which are typically nightshades, gluten, dairy, sometimes eggs, nuts and seeds. And then if someone's coming from a fitness background where they've been prepping a lot, hacking food volume, trying to make these bigger meals that are low calorie, I'll look at that in terms of things like cruciferous vegetables. Are you making this massive bowl of broccoli just to try to stay full because it's low calorie? I look at that a lot. And then the artificial stuff that people put in to try to hack digest. It's not to say that you can't ever have a sweetener of some kind. It's just that some people will go really hard with that stuff in a bodybuilding setting. Now, for the average lifestyle client, if it's just something every now and then in their coffee or they can tolerate it, okay, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the extreme. So I start with kind of those five.
What's an example of an extreme situation?
So there were products that were popular in the bodybuilding industry for a while, and I don't want to throw any companies under the bus, but certain syrups and flavorings and additives and spreads, and it's basically to replace the real food.
Yeah, destroys the gut. Sugar, alcohol.
It's very yeah. So sugar, alcohols, and things are just very hard on the gut. I don't want to throw any company under the bus because just for the sake of the podcast, it's really more the sugar, alcohol content and things like that can irritate people, but there's an individual tolerance and threshold too. So I start with the common irritants. I look at, okay, what are we doing with condiments, seasonings, some of these other things that people throw in there. And then we'll just sort of modify, tweak, substitute as needed. And for some people, maybe they do find some benefits. So folks that may have small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, they might benefit from that approach. The mistake people make though is instead of doing it for a short period of time, it's they do it for the next 2 years. And that's not necessarily that good either. We want to eventually reintroduce certain foods and make sure that we're getting that array of nutrients in and figuring out kind of that blend of your individual tolerance while also maximizing your nutritional status at the same time.
I've been contemplating doing a 30 to 60 day, just full on food elimination, utilizing the food that I just never feel any issues with, which is typically lean protein, not beef. Sometimes beef will give me indigestion, but using fruit and lean protein really to try to see if there's just to see what's if there's a.
Animal foods and fruit are very low reactive foods. So it's from like a carbohydrate or grain perspective, usually white rice is like the most hypoallergenic for most folks, but fruits and animal proteins are very usually well tolerated. And if someone is having an issue, I usually will clarify, hey, is that ground meat or steak that you're having the problem with? And then also
steak always for me.
Okay. So if you're doing better with ground meats, whether it's ground beef or bison, you can keep ruminants in, but try ground versions. And then with steak, it may be chewing your food and potentially supporting with digestive enzymes and monitoring your stomach acid levels. So, folks,
I think you and I need to spend some time offline.
Yeah, we spend some time together. But supporting that and making sure you have a good amount of basically stomach acid or HCl helps to break down and assimilate those proteins, and it helps with the micronutrient aspect of it too. So making sure that we're getting those vitamins and minerals from the lean red meat that we're consuming. But I do still like ruminants in there, or sometimes some wild caught fish, other lean proteins. But it does depend on the person. But for you, from what I'm hearing in terms of some of the foods that you struggle with, and then also kind of spot checking that log a little bit of what you, and then your initial inclination of like, hey, I think this would work for me. That's where I do think you'd probably see some progress with the animal proteins, fruit, and then maybe certain vegetables that, are less reactive than others.
Timing of meals. I think from my experience over the years, I'm very consistent with my timing of meals. There'll be stints of time where I'm doing intermittent fasting, which, quite frankly, I don't know what to think of anymore. I used to really subscribe to it and think that it was like, this was it. I just felt really good when I was intermittent fasting. And then I stopped intermittent fasting when I started doing CrossFit, because I felt like I just could not go into a WOD like.
That's a good move that you did that. Yeah, I would not do time restricted eating in CrossFit. Really, the place for that would be like on a recovery day, or like you're only doing mobility, yoga, low intensity, or maybe like a steady state cardiovascular type approach. It's not going to mix.
Rich
well with
Froning, however.
It's Rich Froning, man. It's like, I don't know that our listeners are gonna,
that's his thing, which I was like so surprised about. That leading into, I think the games this year, not the games this year, the games last year, he was on a team. He intermittent fasted. He said it's like the greatest he's felt ever with training in the front of his first meal. So I don't know, but I think that in terms of timing, the one that I'm most concerned about, the one that I think about most is how far before bed, what time period before bed should be the last meal of the day based on your learning.
I've seen some variance in this depending on the contents of the meal and your ability to regulate your blood sugar. So for someone that really struggles with blood sugar regulation, that could be a problem. The contents of the meal in terms of how heavy the meal is, generally the heavier the meal, the further we're going to want it away from bed, versus a small protein snack or something. You may be able to get away with that a little bit closer. I think where people it kind of are led astray is if they are trying to build muscle and they're like, oh, I need to eat this meal right before bed because I'm trying to recover and maximize protein synthesis and all of that. You don't realize it impacts things like your body temperature, your blood glucose at night, your body's ability to essentially get into that deep restful sleep. So I've played around with this with clients. For some clients, it's basically dinner time is their last meal. And then for other people, they can have that snack afterwards. And this is where having an understanding of your internal health, your insulin sensitivity, which would be measured by things like fasting insulin, blood glucose, and A1C, you can use that to kind of assess how you're doing there. If you are using some type of sleep tracker like an Aura, you'd be able to monitor what's going on. But subjectively too, like if you're waking up in the middle of the night, or you're hot, or you're uncomfortable, or you don't feel well rested, look at what you did the night before and how that contributed to that night's rest, and what happened during the day, like caffeine intake and things. So for some people, it's that dinner meal and then they cut off from there. For others, I find that a small meal that's sort of protein centric with some things that you tolerate well, in the sense they're easy to digest. I don't mean like necessarily, having some sort of snack that's like highly processed that you digest well. Like I wouldn't necessarily do that, but something that's protein forward and not sitting super heavy for you is probably the best idea. If you, for whatever reason, let's say you train later in the day, or you have a job where you get home late if you are going to be going to bed, I would suggest do a light walk after that meal. If you have to get your calories in and it's close to when you're going to sleep, just go, get like a 10-minute walk in, and that'll really, really help with that postprandial glucose and digestion. So a little simple lifestyle tool that goes a really, really long way for your overall health, but it may also support, better sleep versus just some people go have that meal, they sit down on the couch, they're not moving, and then they're just going to go to sleep right after that. That's where they may see the detriment. So be mindful of the placement of the meal, but also what's happening in terms of movement, size of the meal, and just kind of monitor your individual biofeedback from there.
So you're thinking if you go to bed at, let's just call it 10 o'clock and dinner's at 7, you'd be comfortable saying that could very well be like the last time you should.
It could be, yeah, for some folks, if it's a big meal. And then I've seen clients, because the difference is for a young 30-year-old male may be different than a client who's a menopausal female struggling with sleep and trying to regulate blood sugar and things like that. So part of it is a little bit of trial and experimenting for yourself. And then there are general rules of thumb. I don't think there would be any harm. I don't think you're instantly going to lose all your muscle if your last meal was if you have a nutrient dense meal at 7 p.m. and you want to go to sleep at 10, I think that's fine. But people stress out about that. It's no, if you're doing everything right across the day, you're getting enough nutrition in throughout the day, and you're getting great sleep because you stopped eating and that works for you, cool, do that, and then sleep, recover, get your meals in before 7 and you're fine. Some people find they sleep better with maybe they have a small snack after that, or maybe dinner's at 5 or 6, and then they're having the snack at 7 or 8, and they're going to bed at 10. Mm-hmm. And if that works for them, that's okay. So it's more, I'm monitoring the quality of the sleep, the duration of the sleep, and things like your body temperature and other factors like your schedule, because when you get off work is going to impact that meal. Your individual nutrition goals is going to impact that meal. I realize this is frustrating because I give you a lot of individualized answers and you're like, give me the black and white.
No, I get it. I mean,
but it really does depend on the person.
Sure.
But I think you can do either. I just don't like huge meals right before bed. And I've worked with some folks who are either night shift workers or other things that have impacted, they get off work, they have the meal, they got to try to go to sleep. That's where maybe something like a light walk or modifying the meal size can play a role. And the walk helps, especially for people with digestive issues like we talked about earlier.
Talk to me about what you do in the morning when you wake up. What time you wake up, what your morning routine looks like.
So this will vary if I'm on the road or not and what I have access to, but I'm most productive in the morning from a work perspective. And I've been the guy that's had the longer routines and all of that. And it started to get frustrating because I was like, I need to get some work done. The biggest change that I made in my routine was around 2018, 2019. I just stopped checking my phone first thing in the morning and either used another source of alarm, something to wake me up, or I was better at waking up naturally. So my first rule is just no checking your phone, at least the first 15 to 30 minutes. It puts you in a very reactive state and you're responding to what everybody else wants and needs versus being intentional with your day. So that's kind of my golden rule no matter what. Now, over the past 4 or 5 years, have I occasionally broken that depending on the circumstance? It has happened, but it's very rare. It's usually that's the cornerstone, whether I'm at home or I'm traveling. If I'm traveling, it's usually drinking whatever water I have on hand, might be a liter of water with some electrolytes. I go for a walk, I get outside, and that's usually universally what I have access to when I'm traveling. The other nuts and bolts may vary, right? Do I have a gym? Do I have a good source of food around? Do I need to go get food? Do I have if I want to go get coffee or something, right? Do I have to do that? So traveling, it's really just no phone right upon waking, get the water in as you're getting some right now. You're like, man, I need to stay hydrated, get some electrolytes. Then I'll go for that walk. At home, now I have 2 dogs. I got to get them outside. But usually what this has looked like lately, because it helps me get into a better state of acuity, is I do like the cold. I don't necessarily use it for the reasons that people market it for. So there's all talk of fat loss and inflammation and all these things. It puts me in a better mental state, and I consistently do something. And at first it's hard, you don't necessarily want to do it, but then long term, that cold exposure, you kind of weirdly look forward to it in a way. And so for me, it helps get into that state of alertness a little bit faster. And then I pair that with some form of movement, whether it's getting out with the dogs, whether it's hopping on really super short echo bike. I'm not doing this is not my workout. This is just, I just want to wake up so I can get into work. Because what I noticed was after I wrote the book, I went through kind of this a little bit of a morning productivity lull, and I was there, but I wasn't I was sitting there, but I wasn't as present and focused and deliberate with the work output as I wanted to be. And so earlier, it was probably end of last year, early this year, is when I kind of committed to have the access to being able to do repeated cold exposure at home, and then having being able to go in the garage, do some movement of some kind. That was super helpful. But the recipe that stayed the same is no phone. And then just by product of having a dog, I've got to get outside because I got to let them outside pretty much rain or shine, no matter what. So that stays consistent. And, water and electrolytes stays consistent in the morning, no matter what. And then just the parts that change is just, am I home? What do I have access to? And go from there. But for me, I'm not doing like plunge to biohack and be cool. It's literally just like, I got to a point with work where it was a combination of presence for the work output, but then something about like stress reactivity and like your HPA axis. Like when you're a business owner, you get to a point where sometimes it's like you're worried and stressed about even opening an email. Like it gets you to the point where you're like on edge, and it's really helped with that. And I think it's bringing you back into the present. I am not notoriously like the best at meditating and things. I do like to occasionally do breath work, love music, love time outside. I do other things for stress management, but the cold forces you to get back to your breath. And it also, for me, is always a time when you don't want to be thinking about that. It brings you in, back, sits you down. And then I use it as an opportunity to kind of be present, think about things. And I go through, kind of a couple different reflection exercises and
in the
take
cold
it from there. In the cold.
The cold.
It's super quick though. It's literally just like, this is what I'm excited about, or this is what I'm looking forward to. Just kind of centering that. And also if I'm like really not wanting to do it, or it's shitty, and it's like doing some of the harder stuff for the people in your life that you care about, who need you. And that's helpful for me on days where I'm like, I don't want to do this today. Not whether it's the cold or just like sometimes work. In general, there's stuff you don't want to do, or whether it's work, and it's like, there's people I got to show up for, and I'm grateful for them. And I'm also excited about these other opportunities. And so even if this thing right in front of me is like, maybe not exactly, and usually that's not always the cold. Usually it's something like on my calendar, or I got to take care of something, or, as you're building a team, there's things that come with that, or just business owner stuff that pops up. Mm-hmm. And so for me, it kind of brings me back into that moment, which I appreciate. So a little bit of variability, but there's probably 2-3 cornerstone items that stay the same. Biggest change was just don't check your messages. It's okay. You want to throw on a podcast or something, or you have the self-control to like put on some music or whatever, fine. But don't go into your DMs. Don't go like straight into your iMessage. Try to, stay off of that for the beginning and buy yourself a little bit of time. And then I do kind of like some critical tasks I need to knock out. And then from there, it's like, cool, I did some stuff for me. Now, if I need to answer something for someone else or for people, I can do that. I'll do a quick scan for like maybe any emergencies or fires or anything. But other than that, I'm going to just keep going with what I've got set for the day.
What do you do for wind down? Do you have a wind down routine? So
typically it's either reading, spending time with my girlfriend, dogs, really more like home oriented. But I do tend to try to carve out some time for a book. If it's not like too crazy, like hyper stimulating, I'll listen to a podcast or something. But for the most part, it's either reading or getting my thoughts organized, kind of like a brain dump for the next day. That has changed over the years. Consistently though, it's like no TV. I try to eventually shift from like laptop or iPad work to something else, pen and paper or a book, just getting off electronics. And then what I'm doing off electronics may vary depending on the season of life. Like over the summer, if it's bright out longer, maybe I'm outside with the dogs. If it's, maybe I'm going for a walk. If it's wintertime and it gets dark super early, maybe I'm just sitting down reading a book and putting some good stuff in my brain, or doing a brain dump for tomorrow. So that part changes, but it's usually just no electronics. Other than, I'll wrap up screen time on my laptop. I put it on like night shift mode or something to kind of dim that, and then shift into, if it's a weekend, maybe I hang in with the dogs or something. If it's during the work week, usually probably got to do that brain dump first or read something like that. And then I'll go head up to bed.
So no TV. That's good. That's good. So no Netflix.
I know myself, and I will get too invested in stuff that I shouldn't. I have the same issue with like sports and things too. And just as a business owner, it's like I've had to prioritize. That's not to say I won't watch a movie or anything from time to time, but there's certain things that I'm like, the net positive of that for me right now, it's just not the season of life that I'm in. And that's okay though. I do enjoy doing it periodically. And even during like quarantines and stuff, I got into a little bit with shows, but I realized like I lost the habit of reading for a little bit because I was in like production mode in terms of my own work output. And when you're writing and stuff, like sometimes it's easy to stop consuming content. And so what I've tried to do is shift back from that social media consumption, videos, and I listen to a ton of podcasts too, but it's getting back to, okay, just read 10 pages, just do something simple, small like that. And I'm not anti, if it works for you or it's your thing with your family, you want to watch a show, that's fine. But for me, it helps kind of shift gears. It's not always perfect. The wind down is a little less rigid than the startup. Like I need to start up, get going, because I know that for me before noon is where I really make a dent. And then I typically am in meetings. So it's like, if I don't get the stuff done that I need to before the afternoon, it's like, I'm going to be in meetings back to, with a fair amount, or recording shows or doing things that are asked of me. So I've got to be able to create that segmentation. And time blocking, which was when we were chatting a little bit about habits and stuff before the podcast, that was something that kind of universally remains the same too. So those aspects have helped to kind of carve it out, even if the evening changes slightly or if traveling in the mornings switched a little bit.
I want to talk about time blocking before we wrap this up, because I feel like time blocking is such it's a massive part of my life and the success, I think, in my weekday life. I don't really time block as much on the weekends because I really do devote it to my family. But during the week, it is very, very, very clear. If you were to open up my calendar, you know exactly what I'm doing at all times, because I believe that carving out, I don't like to schedule my day 15 minute by 15 minute only. I like to schedule my day in chunks,
like
of time.
themes, basically.
Themes,
yeah.
Right. So like the first 2 hours I'm here, the next hour and a half I'm here, the next 3 hours after that I'm here. There's about an hour and a half of time where I literally every single day say free time. Just that is time that I do not take any meetings. I do not schedule anything in particular. It gives me an opportunity to feel human, right? Mm-hmm. And then I have at the end of my day, I love what you said earlier in this idea that if you pick up your phone first thing in the morning, you're reacting, right? I don't actually like to react in that way until 4 o'clock in the afternoon, because I find that once I start reacting, it's like I kind of like correlate it to when I was Muay Thai kickboxing. If I walked into the ring without the intention of owning the center of the ring, if I walked in and I was already backing up, very, very hard to come back from that, right? It's so hard because once your opponent sees that they can now control the center of the ring, that's going to be their number one motive, because that's where the power is from. And so in life, if I walk into my day on my heels, it's very hard to come back from that, right? So like picking up the phone and like immediately going into what other people want from me as opposed to what I want for myself is hard. So I really do try to make that like reactionary period start, and it's from 4 to 5:30 every day. And that's the time where I'm able to, I like, really dive into the shit that I have to respond to.
And I'll snooze. I don't start responding necessarily. I just may make an observation of later in the day that's going to happen. So I don't, when I do block that out, it's like, okay, I'm not physically on the phone. And then even when I do, if I sweep anything, I know which apps are like your problem areas, right? Or like what's going to lead you down a rabbit hole, versus I can be intentional with this. And certain tools and applications or email, you can snooze things until later. So I'll set like a notification to go off later in the day. I don't need to necessarily do it right now, but I might need to take inventory of what might be expected, especially if there are people who need me within a 24 to 48 hour period that I'm directly managing or leading. As far as external things, that's typically afternoons as well for me. But I do think, use technology to your advantage in terms of how you may need to shuffle things around or set a reminder for later. It's more of a observe, take inventory. I still have the deliberate action that I've set forth for what I'm going to do in the morning. And then I have time in the afternoon to do that as well.
So what does time blocking look like for you?
Time blocking for me is a couple things. It's essentially the time of okay, I'm going to try to cluster things like meetings, themes, things like content. So if I'm doing videos or podcasts or writing, that should be chunked together. If you're getting frequently interrupted, it's very hard to maintain that sort of creative state in your mind. So I do like to chunk those together. I've tried theme days and things like that, but what I found to be most helpful for me is kind of a specific block across the day. So, okay, I'm not taking a meeting at this point. This is my time to produce. And then from there, okay, this is my block or my window, and I'm going to stack these different calls, meetings, team obligations, and things like that. That's gotten harder as I work with people in a variety of time zones, but I've still tried to maintain that as much as I can. And then teach, I have certain teaching responsibilities and program related responsibilities. So I'll try to, confine that to certain windows where it's like, okay, I'm going to pop in and check on this here. I'm going to audit this over here. I'm going to do a team meeting or review over here. So meetings are typically clustered, content creation, typically a block or theme for that. And then there's just the overall window of time of like, okay, I know I can start calls here and I need to shut down here.
Do you have it systemized like that and chunked out in your calendar, or
yes.
is it okay?
Yeah. So typically, any external facing meetings, Google Calendar, my task list is typically, let's say it's noon or 11 or whatever time I got to start getting on the call. It's like, these are the things I personally need to do in my workflow before I'm doing things either with other people in collaboration for other people, or even, external content creation or guest stuff. So most of that is, okay, I have like 3 to 5 things that need to be knocked out. Then I'm going to move into whatever calls. And usually those I try to have a little bit of a theme, like, is this more team oriented, and kind of stack those? Or is this meeting with a contractor? Is this meeting with a potential just networking or person in the industry, right? I'll try to have certain days that may go on, and that's on the Google Calendar. What's happening before those start in terms of the color blocks on the Google Calendar, that's largely me, pen and paper, based on what I've either set out earlier in the week or that morning, based on the needs of the business and the season that we're in.
Dude, this is such a great chat.
Yeah,
you are like I feel like you and I could probably talk for hours and hours on each individual topic that we touched upon today.
Yeah.
You're a super tactical guy, right? Like, I could just tell that, like, you really put a lot of thought and energy into every area that's meaningful in your life, and the stuff that's not meaningful, you really try not to focus on, or at least stave away until further notice, right? I feel like that is something that I've just had such a great time listening to you.
I appreciate it, man.
It's been it's a lot of these conversations that I have tend to be a little bit more back and forth, and this one I was just so enthralled in, like, what you were saying, and so I'm sure that the audience, the value is going to be incredible.
Appreciate that.
If I don't always ask this question, but when I'm inclined to ask it, I do. Why do you do this? Why is it the work that you do is ultimately in service to help others be better, right? That is the premise of this work. So what do you think it is that drives you?
I think most coaches, when they're starting out, it's to help the person that they were a few years prior, whether it's 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, and whatever that struggle was, and closing the gap. So for me, I mentioned a lot of misinformation, misapplication of that. I wanted to create clarity for people. I think now that's shifted. So initially I was very driven by, how do I create clarity within this industry? How do I help people? How do I figure things out for myself, right? Because as much as we may have some selfless and altruistic aspirations, a lot of times as humans, like, we're just trying to figure our shit out, right? So it's like, I went through that season, and then I realized the issue of confidence for coaches and health professionals, and a lack of confidence and self-esteem inhibits their ability to serve others. So if I can help them feel more confident in what they're doing and feel more capable, they can drive change in the people that need them the most. Mm-hmm. So that's been big for me. Right now, I would say, as much as the industry focus is still important. I talk about the concept of the ripple effect on my podcast, which is basically, if we can help health professionals help a bunch of people, that's really cool. But I think like the term impact and stuff is sometimes overused, or I want to add value. Like it's a good notion, but I think there's a lack of like specificity around that notion. It's just tossed out. So for me specifically, I think seeing coaches change in real time, becoming more confident. And then for me, in building a team and understanding these people are going to bat to support our initiatives, our vision, our goals collectively as a company, it's been very cool to see their growth as humans, their personal development, and also as people, they're moving through cool things, whether that's closing on a home or having their first child. Those types of things are meaningful to me. And even though it's not necessarily this hyper-specific business goal, I enjoy being a part of that journey as someone who's supporting them. And it's been a huge challenge for me in a different way, because there was a season of business where it was a lot about Sam. It was, what can Sam produce? What can Sam do? How many things can you check off the list? And it's still about me to some extent, but now because we have bigger goals and we have a larger vision, it requires a team to get there. And so for me, getting excited about that team and developing that team is really important. So that, and then seeing the professionals we're working with and how we can help them show up, man, because it's like when there's all this stuff on social media, people are hesitant to share their message. They may not even enroll a client because they're worried, or they're scared, or they're worried about what someone's going to say, right, in today's environment. So giving them the tools they need to show up for people is really cool, because that's tangible. And then you see them post like a transformation or something, and it's like, wow, you really changed this person's life. So that's super powerful. That's kind of the external factor, internal factor. And then for me, I do like the challenge and figuring it out and bettering myself. That's been the great part of the health and fitness journey we talked about earlier, is that experience. Really, the further I get into things, whether it's trying to write or trying to create content or trying to build a business, it's like so many parallels to a fitness journey in terms of the consistency required, in terms of the daily disciplines that are required, in terms of the focus that's required. It's like, I'm just like geeking out now on like realizing the parallels between them and like how cool it is. It's like the same way you can change your body. It's like you can apply these things to other areas of your life. So that's been really fun for me too.
What a good one, man.
I appreciate
you, brother.
Thanks for having me.
Where can people find you?
I'm Sam Miller Science on all platforms, like Instagram. My podcast is Sam Miller Science and sammillerscience.com. My book is Metabolism Made Simple, and that released in November 2022. So it's out now as the podcast is out. But I'd say I've got tons of free content, whether it's on my site, Instagram, or podcast. So start there. There's like 580 episodes. So I always plug the free stuff first, see if you like it. And then if it resonates with you, there's certainly more to explore if someone wants to do that.
Awesome. Guys and gals, thank you so much for tuning in to this episode. I got an enormous amount. I'm going to sit down. I'm going to sit down with Sam after this and enroll in some sort of a journey, because I feel like there's always more to uncover. There's always more to learn, and the journey is never over, right? It's never over. And I think one thing that is a through line through most of my content is always stay teachable. Right? Stay teachable and love to learn from others. I do that every single time I have a guest on this podcast. I always walk away with something, and I'm sure you did too as well today. It would mean the world to me if you shared this podcast. That is the one massive ask I have of you. And if you're really feeling up for it, write us a 5-star rating and a review. That would be amazing. That's how we grow the podcast. If you write a 5-star rating and review, you enter to win a giveaway of a box of Meal One and a bag of Nightcap. I want to thank Sam again. Thank you, my brother, for being on the podcast. And, I love you guys. I appreciate you guys. You know how much I do. Until the next one, y'all. Peace.